I think most graphics card reviews kind of encourage this fear of missing out because they test everything at max settings rather than how you'd actually use them. So in this video, we're gonna look at more like, how would I actually use an RTX 3060 versus how would I actually use an RTX 5090, and look what the real difference is. Here we see in a Horizon Forbidden West at 1080p medium settings, the RTX 3060 is doing just fine, averaging over 70 FPS. Sure, the 5090 is more than doubling the FPS and is doing it at 4K output using DLSS quality and max settings, but they're both having a good experience here. Note, if you're reading the performance numbers up here, it's the current frame rate, average frame rate for the benchmark run, and 1% lows are the third number when it pops up there. Also, if you're judging the smoothness, this is one of the big differences here, is the 5090 is running at a much higher refresh rate, but you're watching a 60 FPS YouTube video, and the smoothness you see has to do with things being out of sync with the 60 FPS capture and display. So you can look at the frame rates and the frame time graphs to judge smoothness. You can't really see the difference in a YouTube video, and a lot of people don't really understand that. I see it in the comments. Anyway, what if they're both on a 1440p display? Well, the 3060 is still fine. Stick to medium settings, kick on DLSS quality, and it's averaging over 70 FPS. You can absolutely enjoy the game at those settings. The 5090 can max it out at 1440p at over 170 FPS. It will be a lot smoother in motion on a high refresh rate display, but you're still enjoying it on the 3060. What about an Unreal Engine 5 graphical showcase? Well, here we have Hellblade 2: Senua's Saga, and on a 1080p display, the 3060 can run at medium settings preset and average over 50 FPS. No, it's not a 60 FPS lock, but if you are on a variable refresh rate display, this is just fine. And this is a very slow-paced, walk around and look at things kind of game, so I think that frame rate is absolutely fine. I mean, consoles are a 30 FPS lock in this game, so you're blowing that away right there. The 5090 is managing 4K output using DLSS quality in rendering and at the maximum high graphics settings, and is still getting over 100 FPS doing it. So of course the 5090 is offering a smoother and better looking experience, but the 3060 still captures the look of the game and at a very reasonable frame rate. If we switch them both to 1440p displays, the 3060 can stay at medium settings and kick on DLSS quality, and now it's once again averaging a little over 50 FPS. Again, on a variable refresh rate display, I think you'd be absolutely fine. The 5090 can go well over 100 FPS at maximum settings, although here I'm seeing in my 50 series cards, when I'm on the normal TSR pathway and not using DLSS, there seems to be some weird amount of aliasing and corruption, like if you look at the trees in the background and things like that. So something's not quite right in this game for 50 series cards, so probably actually switch over to the DLAA pathway if that's still an issue. This was an issue on all of the launch drivers that I've tested. I haven't gone back and revisited if the latest driver that came out a couple of days ago has done anything for this game. But it was an issue on just the 50 series cards on that driver. It was kind of weird. Anyway, let's switch to another Unreal Engine 5 game. This one allows hardware-accelerated ray tracing. This is Silent Hill 2. Well, the RTX 3060 does have to go down to low settings to average over 60 FPS, although honestly in this game, you could really get by with a much lower frame rate. It's not super fast-paced, whereas the RTX 5090 can max it out as epic settings with hardware RT on, kick on some DLSS quality, things still look great, and you're over 90 FPS. So, but I mean, when you look at the side-by-sides, yeah, the right-hand side does look better, and it's running at a higher refresh rate. But I think you're still capturing the overall look of the game just fine on the left-hand side of the screen. Low, in a lot of games, looks way better than what you think of as low if you have a long time background in the PC space. Low oftentimes used to look like absolute garbage. You know, it's definitely better on the right-hand side of the screen, but I think you're capturing the overall look and feel of the game just fine on the left, both at a 1440p output. Low settings DLSS quality, the 3060 is averaging over 60 FPS here, and the 5090 is around 100 at epic RT on, max settings, no DLSS. What about God of War Ragnarok? 1080p monitor, the RTX 3060 can hang out at medium settings and average around 60 FPS. Whereas the 5090 can max things out at ultra, kick on some DLSS quality, and you're well over 150 FPS. So again, much higher refresh rate experience, and I think you know, you're definitely gonna notice that, especially if you're using a mouse and keyboard. However, this style of game I would probably play on a controller personally, in which case 60 FPS does usually feel very smooth on a controller. On a mouse and keyboard, that's where I like to be over 90 FPS and such if I can, But again, I think you're getting a very, very reasonable experience on the left-hand side of the screen. 1440p for the 3060, stick to medium settings, kick on DLSS quality, and you are still around 60 FPS. If you're on a variable refresh rate display, it should smooth out any of those little dips into the 50s that we're seeing in the 1% lows. And the 5090 at 1440p ultra settings, so maxed it out 1440p, is getting very close to 200 frames per second. So yeah, if you're on a 240 hertz 1440p display, the 5090 is way more at home there, but you're still, like I said, getting a good experience on the 3060. Now, Final Fantasy XVI is a game where I did struggle to get the 3060 to hit 60 FPS. Low settings didn't do much better than medium, and honestly looked a lot worse. So 1080p medium, we're now in the kind of the upper 40 FPS range on the 3060, whereas the 5090 can just max things out at ultra, kick on DLSS quality, and be over 100 FPS. However, again, you can absolutely play games around 50 FPS on a 3060, especially if you're on a variable refresh rate display, and it will be okay. The 1440p display, okay, medium settings, kick on DLSS quality, you're kind of in the upper 40 FPS range again on the 3060. Like I said, still going to be very playable, especially if you have variable refresh rate kicking in, whereas the 5090 can just max things out at ultra settings well over 100 FPS. So again, yeah, it's a better experience on the 5090, but I think on the 3060, you can still perfectly well enjoy the game. How about games that have a path tracing mode? Well, here's Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and the RTX 3060 isn't going to turn on the path tracing mode. Just play at 1080p high, which this game always includes some level of ray tracing. The game looks quite good. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, with the game maxed out plus the full RT mode, kicking on DLSS quality, I also kicked on frame gen times 2 to just remind you that you have that ability on the 40 and 50 series cards. So the real frame rate would feel like about half of that. The latency counter isn't reading correctly there. You can certainly see that the 5090 does produce a nicer image with the full path tracing mode on and is doing it at a higher frame rate. Here we're looking at 1440p, where I kicked on DLSS quality for the RTX 3060, stuck to the high settings, still over 60 FPS. The 5090 can stick to maxed out settings, and here I didn't use any upscaling, but I am using frame gen times 2 to smooth out a 60-ish FPS to a higher refresh rate display. And again, it does look nicer on the right-hand side of the screen. You can see that the ray tracing has better, interactions with the foliage and things like that. But I think it still looks great on the left. A lot of games aren't actually super demanding, especially if you're playing games that are a little bit older. Here we're looking at Ghost of Tsushima, where the 3060 can actually just play at the maximum settings, and as long as you have a VRR display to kind of smooth out a few dips below 60, you average very close to 60 FPS. Turn things down a little bit if you're not on a VRR display, if you want to just lock to that 60. The 5090 can just max things out at 4K, no DLSS, and you're still hitting around 120 frames per second. And yeah, I'm watching this on a 4K display, so I can tell that the image on the right-hand side looks a lot sharper, but the overall graphics settings here are the same, right? You're getting about twice the frame rate and a lot more resolution on the right-hand side, but 60 FPS is looking pretty good on a 1080p display on the left. What about if they're both on a 1440p display? Well, the RTX 3060 can keep things maxed out and just kick on DLSS quality and once again be very close to a 60 FPS lock. And the RTX 5090 on the right-hand side of the screen can just max things out at very high and again be very close to a 200 FPS output. So yeah, if you're on a super high refresh rate 1440p display, it's a better experience on the 5090. But notice that image quality-wise here, now the only difference is native res versus DLSS quality. It's really just a frame rate difference here for the most part, and 60 FPS is perfectly acceptable in my opinion on the on a game of this style. Let's switch into another game that offers a path tracing mode. Here's Cyberpunk 2077 and the RTX 3060 at 1080p ultra settings. Notice I'm just not choosing to use any ray tracing here, and I can just average over 60 FPS. The game is totally playable, maxed out other than ray tracing on an RTX 3060 at 1080p. The RTX 5090 can kick on RT overdrive, path tracing mode, use DLSS quality, and here I kicked on frame gen times 4. So we were at around 60 FPS. This drops it due to the frame gen overhead down to around 50-ish and then times 4. So you can see the latency counter here. Some people might choose to go a different way here. You could go to DLSS balanced or performance and use less frame gen. There's a lot of options to go here, but I'm trying to show that the 50 series does have these kinds of options. So yeah, the 5090 is getting a crazy good experience with all of that, but again, the left-hand side of the screen still captures the overall look of the game. You're going to be able to perfectly play and enjoy the game on the RTX 3060 on a 1080p display. At 1440p, I actually wanted to show that if you're willing to accept a bit less than 60 FPS, the RTX 3060 actually can fit in some RT reflections using DLSS quality. So using the Ultra preset plus kicking on RT reflections but no other ray tracing and kicking on DLSS quality, the RTX 3060 is able to average over 50 FPS, which again on a VRR display could be perfectly acceptable. I would also argue that you could go down another notch or two on the settings and shoot for a higher frame rate. There's a lot of choices here, but I'm just showing this kind of choice is available on the RTX 3060. You do get a lot of nice reflections in Cyberpunk using the RT reflections, so this can be a good way to go. The 5090, on the other hand, if you go with the path tracing mode at 1440p, use DLSS quality and then kick on ×4 frame gen, you'd be perfectly at home on a 360 Hz 1440p display. You don't need to use the ×4 frame gen. Honestly, you don't even need any upscaling if you just want to be like 60 FPS-ish. But again, both sides of the screen, you are capturing a good-looking Cyberpunk game. It is certainly better on the right. Another thing I want to highlight is that if you're playing more competitive esports types games, where you turn down graphics settings and things like that, to get a competitive edge, then the RTX 3060 is absolutely fine. You can chase high enough frame rate experiences. In Call of Duty Black Ops 6, the RTX 3060 at 1080p basic settings is averaging well over 100 frames per second. The 5090, even at a native 4K with no upscaling, can average over 200. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's twice the frame rate and at 4K instead of 1080p. It is a much more powerful graphics card. But if your goal is just to play the game, then honestly, I think the RTX 3060 can do just fine here. Sure, maybe you're not going to be in the top 0.1% of players at 100 FPS when you could be getting 300 or something like that, but it's doing fine. And if they're both at 1440p, stick to the basic settings on the 3060, kick on DLSS quality, and again, you are back to close to 100 FPS on the RTX 3060. The RTX 5090 can basically reach CPU limits. You can see that the GPU usage percentage, if we look right here on the 5090, is often well below 100% utilization, indicating that in a lot of these scenes, these graphic settings are so, because we're down at the basic preset now, are so not demanding that the graphics card is not the limiting factor. The rest of the system can sometimes struggle to keep up. Anyway, you're getting around 300 FPS on the 5090. So again, even if you're on like a 300 and something hertz 1440p display, the 5090 has you covered here. Anyway, those are the tests that I ran. What was the point of this video? Again, I'm not saying that somebody shopping for a 3060 is also necessarily shopping for a 5090. This is more of a like anti-fear of missing out type of video where it's like, look, if graphics card prices aren't great right now, just remember you can still play video games just fine on much more modest hardware. If the graphics card in your system is around RTX 3060 level, you probably don't actually need to upgrade. That doesn't mean you can't upgrade if you want to. And I'm not trying to say don't. Just remember that you don't have to upgrade, right? You could probably wait for prices to become more reasonable. Hopefully things settle down. But like I said, if you're not enjoying the experience that you're getting and you have the money to do an upgrade, great, go for it. And is the 5090 or other more powerful, not more powerful than the 5090, but other powerful GPUs offering a better graphics experience at higher frame rates? Yes, absolutely. And remember, the real thing that this video couldn't really capture other than using a number is that a higher refresh rate experience does look a lot smoother in motion. It does feel more responsive. It's nice to have. But the 3060 and all of the games I just put it through the paces, if you use more realistic graphic settings rather than setting everything to ultra, you see that it can hang in there just fine, to be honest. So anyway, upgrade if you want, but just remember, you don't have to upgrade. Unless, if you're way below a 3060, maybe think about upgrading, but remember you could upgrade to a more modest card like a 3060 if you just want to play some games. You don't necessarily need to buy a $3,000 graphics card. Anyway, hope this video was interesting, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.